I've been fascinated by what you might call the afterlife, or the spiritual side of life and consciousness, and if there's evidence that consciousness continues after death. So for me, it was never a religious thing. It's more of a, I'd say, a spiritual thing and a fascination with that side of what's going on. And I think I read my first book about near-death experiences in the 1980s when I read Raymond Moody's book. And after that, I was looking for other books, but it was over the years that more and more and more were coming out. And I found this idea of verifications where people will see something while they're out of body and then it's later verified. I found that really fascinating. And that's kind of the basis of my podcast is there evidence of an afterlife, and what evidence is there? And I talk to a lot of people on my podcast who've had near-death experiences, and a lot of them are in my book. And I found that over the years of reading the books, this one particular point of verification was not shown up. Wasn't really one book that focused on it. And then in 2007, a book was published, but since then, I haven't seen any others. And I thought this is a really important part of the near-death experience. Is for a lot of us, we want to hear these verifications when people have an out-of-body experience and they see something in another part of the hospital or that's miles away from the hospital, and that's verified. It's really impactful, and kind of like you look at it and you think, well, you just can't explain this by ordinary means. People might say if had this view while they were in the operating theatre and their body was in the operating theatre, they may have had some form of consciousness, or maybe they were alive, they weren't having a near-death experience, but it was all hallucinations because of the drugs they were on or something. But, seeing something in the room down the hall from where your body is dead because the heart stopped, your brain is flatlined, they're trying to resuscitate you. It's very difficult to argue against. And this thing of near-death experiences is just fascinated me on the other level of the spiritual side of it, where people go on to a spiritual space, and it could be an amazing landscape, it could be just a realm of light, it could be a dark void, or it could be other locations. And then they meet spirit guides and spiritual beings, and all these different things happen with a life review and learning about reincarnation. So if this thing, when they're in their out of body experience on Earth, so to speak, can be verified, what does that say for the spiritual side? Does that mean we can go on to say, well, this is a good idea, a good clue that perhaps all the spiritual stuff is also right? But even the very basic point of it is that consciousness has left the body and the body's dead at that moment, and they still have consciousness. And that they say that their perception is much better than your normal kind of waking state, like we are right now. Their sight and their hearing, and they see colors they never see anywhere else, and their thought processes are so much faster. It's like being freed from the physical body, the physical brain has allowed you, whatever you are, your soul, your spirit, your consciousness, to be what it really is. And it's the physical brain that really slows everything down. It's like they say they see colors that they don't see on Earth. I think that's because our eyes are limited in spectrum, but once they're free of the physical eyes, then they can see the full spectrum. So yeah, I just find it so fascinating, and I've done hundreds of podcast episodes, and I'm still fascinated by it. And it also links up with these other parts, the things I talk about in the podcast, with children with past life memories and deathbed visions and mediumship and shared death experiences and all these different things that are kind of puzzle pieces of the bigger picture. We might not have all the puzzle pieces, but we can see a picture emerging amongst all these different things, which are evidence for consciousness being something separate from the body.
And I wanted to ask, what is consciousness in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't think it's a product of a human brain. And, asking what is consciousness, it's almost like nobody really knows. You could list things that might indicate consciousness, like you're self-aware and you can see and hear. But what is actually consciousness? I think it is external to the body. And in a way, you could look at it as that your brain is like a radio, your consciousness is the radio station. But just because the radio breaks, it doesn't mean the radio station stops transmitting. And that's where the consciousness continues. But, people use words like spirit and soul and spiritual energy of some kind as consciousness. I think it's probably something that's got all those different ideas all mixed together. If you use the word soul, that has a lot of religious baggage coming with it. And it just seemed to be something that exists outside of time and outside of space as we kind of know it. It's almost like you could say it's in another reality or it's another dimension. But again, I think these are things that we just don't really know. We've just got hints and clues about it all.
So, one of the stories that you discuss in your book, or actually, I should call it a testimony rather than a
Mm.
story because it's not fictional at all. It's from Barbara Bertolome, and she's able to recount how her body was resuscitated while she was actually dead. So, she shouldn't have been able to recount that. How do you think skeptics would be able to explain this?
I think there was some testing done with some rats when the rats were dying, and they found that as the rats died, there was this big burst of electricity in their brains. And there are some skeptics that say this is something that's what a near-death experience is. It's like a sudden awareness and hallucinations and things. And there may be people who say, well, she wasn't actually dead or unconscious. She was in some way aware and she heard something, and that kind of her brain kind of hallucinated stuff and put images together depending on what she was hearing, and that could explain what had happened. And there's others. There's a thing called when you can have general anesthetic, and you're supposed to be completely unconscious, but there are a small number of cases where people wake up under general anesthetic, but they're paralyzed. But the thing with Barbara Bartolome is that they had her hooked up to this machine that showed she was flatlined, and that the things that happened that she reported happened while she was flatlined. And so if her heart has stopped and her brain is not working, as I had a guest on my podcast, Dr. Eben Alexander, and he was professor of neurosurgery at Harvard Medical School. He said to me, if your heart stops, your brain will flatline in about 20 seconds. And when it's in that condition, it's impossible for it to make and retain complex memories. But that's exactly what's happening with Barbara and with all the other cases in my book. So I think it's very difficult for skeptics to have any kind of an argument. From my point of view, is, because what she did was accurately describe the people who were there. This woman nurse got on the phone and was calling for the defibrillator to be brought in, and how this one of the surgeons pushed the two guys apart who were doing the CPR, and he punched her in the chest. And I think it's some kind of technique, and what it does is it gives the heart a real shock. And on the second time he hit her, it got her heart started again. And she did say this to the neurosurgeon after she'd stabilized. And he said that he was such a skeptic, and he was standing next to her. And she said he clenched his fists and clenched his teeth. And I'm not going to stand here and listen to this anymore. And he stormed out of the room. But everybody else in the room stayed there. And the other surgeon that was there sat down and said, okay, tell us again what happened. What did you see? But it was the fault of one of the technicians that she had this point where she died on the operating table. And after a while, they wouldn't talk to her about it because they knew the hospital was liable and she could sue them. So she's still in touch with the orthopedic surgeon that was in the room with her. And, he's confirmed everything is correct.
what's one of the most impressive NDEs that you've come across in doing your podcast and writing this book?
There's so many that are so fascinating. There's near-death experiences that can be really quite extensive, and there's others that can be quite short. And there's these different things that you could have in a near-death experience, but not everybody has them. It's like the life review and meeting spiritual beings or meeting deceased loved ones, traveling through a tunnel. That's one of those things that most people think as part of a near-death experience. Everybody goes through a tunnel of light, but it's only a 15-20% of people that do that. And like one near-death experience that's for me that stands out is from Ingrid Honkler from Colombia, and she was nearly 3 years old, and she's in her garden with her older sister, and her parents have just gone to work, and they've got a maid in the house that's supposed to look after them, but she was awful. She didn't bother. And Ingrid and her sister were playing catch with a ball across a water tank, and the ball fell on the water tank, and Ingrid leaned over to get the ball and fell in, and that's when she drowned. And she came out of her body and she was floating in the water, and she saw a body floating. She didn't realize it was her. And then there were all these incredible colors and lights. And she found herself suddenly in the room where her maid was. And her maid was lying on her bed listening to a soap opera on the radio. And Ingrid was up at the ceiling looking down on her and thinking to herself, oh, wow, look, there's Maria. And she heard the soap opera and saw what was happening there. Then she thought of her mum, and suddenly she was out on the street and she's above her mum watching her walk to the bus stop. And her mum suddenly stopped and turned round and started running home. And when she got back, she ran straight to the water tank, and that's where she got Ingrid out, and she was resuscitated. So it was later on when Ingrid was described what she saw, and her mum was, you couldn't possibly have seen that because when I was on the way to the bus stop, that you were drowned in a water tank. How could you know that that had happened? And Ingrid did more research when she got older and tracked down the soap opera episode that was playing on the radio in that time and confirmed that was the right one from when she was in the tank. And she kind of has contact with spiritual beings now since that experience. It's like the veil is a lot thinner for her. And she asked them, why did I go to the maid's room? Why didn't I just go and see my mum? And they said to her, it was a kind of demonstration of love and the power of love. When you went to the maid's room, there was no love, there was no connection. But when you went to where your mum was, there was unconditional love and there was an instant connection. That's how come she turned around and ran back to the house. So I really like that near-death experience for those things of verification, that it seems like a really strong case to me.
So you were mentioning there at the beginning a few things that seem to be common across NDEs. So in your experience, what kind of elements do you find to show up consistently across NDEs?
I think maybe the most powerful one is the life review. When you are in a position where you review your entire life, and it's as though you see every second of your entire life. And it's weird because all the near-death experience say it happens in an instant, and yet you experience your whole life. And you see how you affect people by your behavior, and you experience all of your emotions throughout the whole life. But then you experience the emotions of the people you interacted with. So if you were really mean to someone and they felt bad, then you'll feel that yourself. And it gives you empathy and an understanding of how your behavior affects people. And if you do something nice, then you see how it feels when you've done something nice. And it also has a ripple effect. So if you're mean to someone and they feel really bad, they might go off and be mean to somebody else, or just really sad with someone, and that affects them. So you see the ripple effect of your actions going out. And also, one of the things with life reviews is that they see lots of things that their spirit guides might say are really important, but to us they may seem so insignificant, just some small little thing that you'll do to help somebody or mean to somebody. To you it's nothing, you just carry on with your day, but it seems like it's very important, and those are some of the things that we should pay attention to. So the life review, I think, is very impactful, and it's something where people come back from near-death experience and it really changes them for the rest of their lives. And there's that thing of meeting deceased loved ones, which can be very impactful. There's several people like that in the book. And there's also one I like where this woman was in the space and she could see her family, which was maybe the afterlife, but she was like, but my family are still alive. And she realized that this was their higher self, so to speak, almost like the spirit in some way. And then on the other side, there was all these people in all sorts of clothes, maybe really old period costume, hundreds of years ago, people that looked like they may be from the future, even people that didn't look like people, they didn't like humans. And she realized these were all her past and future lives, and that a piece of her soul was in all of them. And yeah, so the tunnel is that thing that, people kind of the common idea is they die maybe in a hospital bed and then they look up and they see the light, and it's that idea, go into the light and go down this tunnel of light. But people say that when they are in this tunnel in a near-death experience, they say that tunnel is not really what it is, but they can't really describe it, and that the word tunnel is probably the best one they can come up with. And so I've had people describe the tunnel as being enormous and they're traveling up it at great speed. And I've had people say the tunnel's really small and it's dark and there's a light at the end of it. I've had people tell me that in this big tunnel, they can see other people traveling up it, or they can see people going back the other way towards Earth. I had a guy describe his tunnel as like an aircraft with all the seats removed, but it was an aircraft that just seemed to go forever into the distance. And there was this light coming through all the windows because it was dark inside. And there's a girl in the book, she was 7 when she had a near-death experience. She talks about being on this tunnel that was made of transparent bricks. And this incredible rainbow light was outside the bricks, lighting the tunnel. And the floor was very uneven. And she found she had to kind of crawl up the tunnel because the floor was so bad. So this idea of a tunnel of light is a lot more complicated. Like I say, not everybody has it. And there's encounters with spirit guides, and some people find that really powerful. And in a way, they're given a message or a job or a mission and said, you have to go back to Earth. You've still got things to do. Or somebody might be saying to them, I don't want to go back to Earth. And the spirit guide was saying, yeah, but you have a family, you have children, your life path isn't complete. And there's one other little thing that I've noticed from these ones I've written about in the book is 3 people describe this place of learning, this kind of place of knowledge. That's a massive white building that's just incredible. And that inside they come across all these spirits that are at tables and they're all studying books, and around them there's these shelves that go right up out of sight, full of scrolls and books. And some of them are in period costume again, like, clothes from years ago. It just seems to be a place of knowledge and a place of study. And that these people in the book are taken there, and that's where they experience their life review. And that's another thing about a life review, is that when they see it, it can be really emotional and upsetting. And you've got your spirit guides with you, but they're not judging you. They're backing you up, and it's like they've got their hand on your shoulder, or they're giving you a hug and helping you through it. And it's you that's judging yourself and looking at all these things, saying, those were terrible things I've done. I can't do that again. So I don't find it interesting. There's no judgment at all when they get into that space in the afterlife. Yeah, so I hope that's answered the question.
So I wanted to understand your thoughts on heaven versus hell, and what can we learn about that from NDEs?
It seems there's lots of different spaces that people go to in NDEs. There are people who report a hell experience in their near-death experience, and it's not all love. And there are people who have what you might call neutral near-death experiences, which are not full of love, but they're not really bad. And it seems to me that when you have a near-death experience, you get exactly what you need. The near-death experience is tailored exactly for you. And I don't know if it's your spirit guides that may be doing it or it's your subconscious. But I talked to Howard Storm. He had a near-death experience where he went to a very dark place with all these people shouting at him and attacking him. And that was a really awful experience. And he was a really strong atheist. And it was almost like being an atheist, that's the space he went to, because that was how he thought things might work. But he started thinking, I got to get out of here, and maybe if I call to Jesus or God, and he wanted to say a prayer, and he couldn't think of any because he's an atheist. He doesn't know any prayers, and he said he like started quoting a commercial from the TV, and then he started quoting Shakespeare, and then he suddenly remembered the Lord's Prayer, and he started saying that, and then all these nasty people around him started backing off, and they were shouting at him to stop. But he noticed they were backing off, so he kept saying it. And then this light appeared above him, and some spirit came down and scooped him up and took him into the light. So that, he said, was Jesus. And it seemed like for him as an atheist to get this spiritual message, he needed such a kick up the pants that he went somewhere awful first of all, and then found his way out of it. So that was right for him, and that was a kind of hellish experience. There was a woman I talked to who was the nicest lady you'd ever meet. Looked like such a great mum and a big smile on her face. And during her near-death experience, she said she spent 2 years in hell with demons and all these nasty things happening. And eventually she got out of it by singing a Christmas carol, which was interesting because Howard Storm said the Lord's Prayer, that got him out. She sung a Christmas carol, that got her out of that dark place. But then when there's neutral experiences, there's this guy, Jim Bruton, and he was a very technical guy, and he built a replica of a First World War fighter plane, and he flew it himself. First flight, it crashed, and that's what caused his near-death experience. And he found himself in this kind of cityscape with this big egg in front of him that was like 10 feet tall, and it was made of steel, and there were all these holes in it. And inside you could see all these cogs and gears and mechanisms whirring. And he found that he could look inside, and some of these cogs represented a terrible thing in his life, and that he could pull it out and throw it away. And that was no longer a part of his life. And the mechanism would rejig itself so it could continue running. So I see that that's tailored to him because he's such a mechanical minded guy, and he comes to this mechanism that's related to his life. And yeah, so this idea of heaven and hell, I don't think hell exists. And in a way, I suppose I don't think heaven exists. I kind of think that when people have a near death experience, it's almost like the theatre of the near death experience. And the place they go to is a place that is just for this. It's not heaven, it's not hell, it's not the afterlife. It's some kind of spiritual space where the person can experience all this stuff to kind of get them on track in a way. It's almost like the near death experience is an intervention or something. Like there's somebody may be living their life and the spirit guides are going, this isn't going to plan. And that person has an accident and the spirit guides are, oh, quick, look, he's had an accident, quick, grab him. We'll give him that near-death experience and then get him back on the right path. But, it's just me guessing about how it might work. It's this idea within reincarnation where the reason you come to Earth is to experience everything there is to be human. And so in all these different lives, you'll experience terrible things, people be nasty to you, but in other lives, you're the nasty person, and it's so you can get that experience, and you might have a life that's really down and real a lot of trouble and you feel awful, and you might look at that and think, that's I'm not going to be reincarnated again. I don't want to come back to Earth. But your soul might be looking at that experience and think, wow, this is a great learning time. What I'm learning here, I'm definitely coming back to Earth. Well, the only thing I could say is that's that reincarnation thing of learning that your soul may have lives on other planets that before they come to Earth, and then Earth is a really tough school and they learn a lot here, and that before you're born, you sit down with a group of souls and decide what role they're going to play in your life, what role you're going to play in their life. And so the good and the bad is for them, it's almost like putting on a play. And so you can experience these things. And there's, there might be this idea of I need to have a life where my father is really mean to me. Somebody in your soul group will put their hand up and say, "Yep, I'll be mean to you. I'll be your father." And it's after the life you come back to the afterlife, and then you review it and you see how it went and so what you've learned. And it's that emotional thing in the life review. It would be such a learning experience. And then it may be the next life you're mean to that person who was mean to you. And it's not because you want to get back at them. It's not like karma and there's this idea of punishment or something. It's just you're learning both sides of the coin. And it could be you need hundreds of lives to learn all these different things about being human.
So one thing we also notice with NDEers is that some will come back and will have this renewed joy and love of life, and others will struggle very much when they come back, and they will struggle fitting back into their old life. Why does this happen? And more importantly, how do you think about these two types of people and their reactions to coming back to life?
I suppose it might be just down to the individual and what kind of character they've got, or maybe what sort of life you're coming back to. If you're, it's like there's a statistic that 70% of people who have a near-death experience get divorced afterwards, and because it changes them so much. And I think that there's some people who go into it are very money-driven and materialistic, and they're making a lot of money, and they come out back from the near-death experience, and they don't want to do that anymore. They become a lot more spiritual, and money's not important. And if you've got a partner who likes the money, they don't like losing it. But there's some people I've noticed have a near-death experience, and they get to this point where perhaps a spirit guide or a spiritual being or maybe one of their loved ones is saying, "You have to go back now," and they say, "No, no, no, I don't want to go back." And others go, "Okay, yeah, I'm ready to go. I've got to go back," and they don't have a problem with it. And it's probably just down to your character and how you process it and how much of the near-death experience you remember. Because some people have said to me that they were told, "You're not going to remember everything. We'll allow you to remember just enough so that you know something has happened." Or they're in a position where they see what's planned out for the rest of their lives, and they allow them to see a couple of things, and then they take away the memory of everything else that maybe they've seen. And there was one woman who was given the opportunity to change something after her near-death experience, and it was in her plan that she'd have chronic illness for the rest of her life. And she said, "No, can we get rid of that?" And the spirit guides was, "Yeah, sure. Okay, we'll remove the chronic illness." So when you come back and you have these two different viewpoints, I suppose it's what you're coming back to, if you have a very loving family or not, and how old you are when you get back, and how ill you'll be afterwards. So it's different for different people, isn't it? It's like everything. Yeah, it's like Ingrid Onkler. She said that when she went back to school, she thought all the kids around her were so immature. And also, she was suddenly such a great student and really very clever and top of the class going through all that. And I sometimes ask people who have had their near-death experience when they're children of when they were out of their body, did they have an adult perspective? Were they more soulful? And they weren't, didn't have a child's point of view of everything that was happening. And some of them say it's kind of like that. It's almost like there's two simultaneous consciousnesses running together. You've got to keep the childlike viewpoint, but then there's something greater than that operating as well.
I think you've done such a wonderful job with collecting these testimonies and publishing them in your book. For those that are going to read your book or are thinking about reading your book, what is your hope that they take away from it?
I suppose it's a thing of confirmation that consciousness continues after death. There's people that email me at the podcast occasionally and say how much the podcast episodes, the information has helped them. And these may be people who are grieving and they've recently lost someone and they didn't know about near-death experiences or any of this stuff. And if they say it's really helped me because it doesn't make me feel my loved one has just died and that's the end of them. They're not there anymore. And I've had emails from people who have a really strong fear of death and they lie awake at night and it's a constant in their life, this fear. And by learning this information, it relieves that in some way. So it can be really quite helpful getting this information out there. So I suppose that's the thing to take away from the book. And I kind of feel like I'm not trying to force it on anybody. I just present the information and you can make your own mind up. But it seems quite powerful to me that so many people see these things they couldn't have seen and they're verified and it's happened over and over. And the people in the book, so many of them have been on my podcast, and I made sure that I talked to them about all these events so that I could get it accurate. And before the book was published, I sent them the chapter they're featured in. So can you check it for accuracy? So they if there was any little errors, then they'd be fixed. So we can be sure the actual person that I've written about has said, yes, what you've put in the chapter is correct. So it's that thing, proof of consciousness, surviving death, or evidence of it. That's what I'm trying to get to people and hopefully what they'll get from it. Well, one of the podcasts is called Our Paranormal Afterlife. My other podcast is called Alien UFO Podcast. I've done a total of over 800 episodes. And, you can find them on just about any podcast app, whether it's Apple or Spotify. My book is on Amazon and it's in paperback and Kindle and audiobook. And you can get it in Barnes and Noble and places like that, but you probably have to order it from their website or go in the shop and order it. My website is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk, and it's called Past Lives Hypnosis because I'm a hypnotherapist and I take people through past life regression, and I've done hundreds of those sessions over Zoom. So that's another thing that I do. So my main website is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk, and the book's called Verified Near-Death Experiences. It's been great. It's been really nice talking to you.